Hello and welcome back to the Lowdown, everybody, and what an episode we have lined up. Today, we are debating the perfect next manager for your club, including a debate about who would be the perfect replacement for Erik Ten Hag.
Tuchel's record at top clubs over the years, I think, has been pretty remarkable, actually.
You look at his coaching career so far, and he's got really good returns out of squads almost immediately. Whether Sarri or Thomas Frank fits West Ham best, I think if a club like West Ham came to the table for Thomas Frank, I think he'd really consider it.
And his managerial record, he doesn't really have a bad mark against him.
And who is the manager to rescue Everton's season?
I think he's probably one of the more underrated managers out there right now. It's a bit of a statement, I think, if Everton were to get him.
Hello and welcome back to the Lowdown, everybody. Joining myself and Mikey McCubbin today, we've got a real treat for you. It's Sam Blitz of The Football Show, football journalist here at Sky Sports. Sam, welcome to the Lowdown. How are you doing?
Yeah, very well, thank you. It's calm with the international break a little bit after the hectic Premier League weeks we've had, but and thank you for having me on the show.
Absolute pleasure. And I mean, you say calm, but there could be some huge decisions made this international break, which kind of got us thinking. It's often the time when Premier League clubs take stock. There are a number of managers under serious pressure. As we film this on Wednesday afternoon, it's still not totally clear what will be the results of that meeting held by Man United's directors yesterday afternoon in London. There might well be a change of manager at this stage. We don't know by the time this video goes live, but we're going to talk first of all about Man United and then a number of other Premier League clubs that are struggling right now. And we're going to try and find the perfect next manager for them. Sam is going to operate as the sporting director, sort of choosing between our suggestions, let's say. And Sam, let's just briefly sort of give a little bit of an overall picture for Man United, because it's not looking good at the moment.
No, it isn't at all. I mean, I look at Manchester United at the moment, and there is very little tactical planning there. I think they're way too easy to play against because the patterns of play just aren't there. They're really struggling to build out the back. When they do get into good areas, teams are pressing them really easily, and that's creating mistakes at the back. So I think if we're looking at a new Manchester United manager, we need to have a clear pattern of play at both ends of the pitch, because it's defensively as well. There's so many gaps in Ten Hag's squad at the moment. I think last season only Sheffield United conceded more shots than them, and they finished bottom of the table. So they're going to need to sort that out. They're way too easy to play against, but I think the most important thing for what Manchester United need is a long-term manager. We've been here far too many times before, haven't we? With Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, with interim managers such as Ralph Rangnick and Michael Carrick, and caretaker managers as well. So we need someone to actually come into the dugout, really take this squad by the horns almost, and then Omar Barada was talking the other day about Manchester United, him wanting to take Manchester United back to the top by 2028. So we need to...
He's giving himself a nice bit of time there.
Exactly. So it needs to have a long-term structure. So ideally, one manager to take Manchester United towards that level.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's no surprise that he is under pressure. This is Man United's worst ever start to a Premier League season, just topping last year and another year as their worst previous starts. They've only scored 5 goals. I think only Southampton, who have scored fewer in the Premier League so far. They haven't scored in their last 3 Premier League games. If Ten Hag is removed as manager, no one would be totally surprised, I think it's fair to say. But Mikey, why don't you kick us off with your suggestion about who would be your perfect next manager for Man United if needed?
Yeah, I mean, you two have highlighted, all of United's problems there, of which there are many. It feels very all-encompassing what United are facing at this moment in time. But at this moment in the season, I think it is still salvageable. And I think, like you're alluding to there, Sam, I think that the days of United appointing interims has to be over. Who knows, by the time you're watching this, maybe Ruud van Nistelrooy will be in the dugout, but I hope not. I think United, after what happened in the summer with the U-turn on Ten Hag after the FA Cup final, I think there has to be a top-class manager in place, on a permanent basis. And for that reason, I've gone for, I think, the obvious shout, the only truly top level manager who is available right now. Of course, Ten Hag, if he is to be sacked, is going to cost a lot of money. Apparently could be up to £16 million. That is, a huge amount for United, given the work that was done in the summer to offload players and get players off the wage bill in order to even up PSR. It would be a big blow, especially given that they missed the opportunity to sack him for less money in the summer. So Thomas Tuchel, you probably predicted already. I think he is, obviously, doesn't have to be bought out of a contract, which is, first of all, a massive plus. He's obviously already had contact with Ineos in the summer. Reports that, those talks got to the stages of, finances being discussed over a deal to bring him in, and then they, eventually broke down. Thomas, he's not the perfect candidate. There are reasons that, he might not be so suited to a job like United. He can sometimes rub up the wrong way with hierarchies, as we saw at Chelsea, as we eventually saw at Borussia Dortmund, of course PSG as well. But PSG and Chelsea are not the easiest employers to work for. Let's remember Bayern Munich as well, a club that is in transition behind the scenes over the last few years, and didn't have the best ending there last year, but was up against a Bayer Leverkusen side that were breaking records left, right and centre, of course. Finished the season unbeaten. Tuchel's record at top clubs over the years, I think, has been pretty remarkable, actually. The way that he took over Chelsea in 2021 and turned them into pretty much the best defensive team in England, won the Champions League, got to an FA Cup final, got to another 2 domestic cup finals the following year and improved them in the league. I think 21-22 was their best points tally in the Premier League since 2017 when they won the title under Antonio Conte. When you talk about patterns of play, I mean, Thomas Tuchel, lives and breathes them, in terms of his ability to set up teams in a possession-based style as a defensive tactic, but also get them scoring goals, I think is pretty remarkable. I think the player who scored the most goals under him at Chelsea in a single Premier League season was Mason Mount in his second campaign on 11, and yet he was still able to get them to where he got them in the league.
Would you see that as a potential negative, though, that none of his attacking players really shone under Tuchel at Chelsea?
No, I think it's a massive positive. I mean, the amount that goals were spread out throughout the side, I think, is a big positive, because let's face it, I don't think it matters who is really the manager at Man United. United's attackers have underperformed for a number of years now. Marcus Rashford's the only one that we can really say has had, more than one outstanding season at Old Trafford. And when you consider that, Chelsea tried to remedy that by bringing Romelu Lukaku in. And yes, some people could say, Tuchel didn't handle the Lukaku situation. Well, when you see the way that Lukaku has behaved at, Inter Milan since then, I think it's fair to say that was a difficult situation for Tuchel for any manager to handle. And so despite having a lack of a world-class number 9 at his disposal, Tuchel was still able to get that Chelsea team functioning in a really, really good way and, winning games ultimately. I think from a United perspective, yes, not scoring anywhere near enough goals, but just in general, United's tactics are not good enough. United's approach to games is not good enough. And Tuchel, I think if Tuchel were to come in and make Man United a team that could win games 1-0 fairly consistently and build towards becoming a more exciting attacking unit over time, I think that is a really, really safe option.
He's made a good case.
He has made a good case. He has made a good case. It is, it's a persuasive one. I actually looked back on a tweet that I put out in May, I think it was, and I said that my order of preference for Man United would be Thomas Tuchel, Marco Rose and Thomas Frank. And to be honest, I think all those candidates have very good shouts. I think Thomas Frank is well worth considering, and we will touch on him throughout this episode actually for a couple of other clubs, or at least one other club. But Marco Rose as well, I think, is a name I'd love to throw into the hat. It's not as easy an appointment as Thomas Tuchel because he is currently the RB Leipzig manager. But you look at his coaching career so far, and he's got really good returns out of squads almost immediately when he's gone in there. RB Salzburg, he won 2 Austrian titles, 1 Austrian Cup. That's nothing particularly special at RB Salzburg, but what he did in Europe was really impressive. Reached the Europa League semi-finals the following year, won all his Europa League games in a group that also included Leipzig, which is quite embarrassing for Leipzig, for their little brother, effectively, to beat them home and away in the Europa League. Then gets that move to Gladbach, finishes 4th in his debut season. They were top of the league until about December time that year. They beat Bayern Munich, they beat Frankfurt home and away. Frankfurt at that time under Ole Glasner were a really, really good side as well. The following season he finished 8th, but they got into the Champions League last 16. This is highs that Gladbach have not really got back to since his departure. The blot on his copybook, people will be like, oh, it didn't really work out at Dortmund. You know, he only had one season there. That was in 21-22. They just lost Jadon Sancho. And yes, they were embarrassed in Europe, I think it's fair to say. They dropped into the Europa League. They got humiliated by Rangers. I think they lost 6-4 in aggregate. Really, really not a good result for Borussia Dortmund whatsoever. But actually their league performance was really pretty impressive. I think they finished 2nd in the league that year. It was their most goals they've ever scored in a league campaign. I think they scored 85. That was pretty impressive. He left mainly due to issues with the board and wanting to go in a different direction, and potentially the future of players like Haaland and Bellingham looked like it was likely that they were going to leave in due course. And he's been at Leipzig since 2022. He finished 3rd and 4th in his 2 seasons there. He's won the DFB Pokal. 77 goals was their 2nd most goals they've ever scored in a league campaign in 23-24. He's reached the last 16 of the Champions League on both occasions. And unlike with Man United, he had to lose big players pretty much every summer as well, and he's maintained performance levels. You know, Gvardiol leaving, Szoboszlai and Kunku. This summer, Dani Olmo, Simakan. And yet they are still, as it stands, joint top of the Bundesliga with Bayern Munich, only behind them on goal difference as well. So this is a guy who is, I'd say, more tactically similar, if that is clear what really Ten Hag is, but he's more of a vertical, counter-attacking style of play, which is not too big a departure from what Ten Hag is right now, whereas Tuchel, if he's going to introduce, and I think he is very tactically flexible, to be fair, Tuchel, but a 3 at the back would be a huge departure from what Ten Hag's been doing. Marco Rose maybe feels like a more seamless appointment, potentially, but maybe harder to secure, given the fact that he is currently employed by Leipzig. And I think he would see Man United as a big step up on RB Leipzig, understandably, given its history of the club, and maybe has less potential to blow up in the next 18 months, 2 years. So feels like that longer term appointment that you were potentially looking for, Sam. Yeah. So there you have it. 2 pitches.
Well, the thing is that I like Marco Rose. I think he's doing a good job. I just can't see him wanting to leave RB Leipzig at the moment, especially given how open the Bundesliga is at the moment. Obviously seeing Bayer Leverkusen win it the season before, that's given a lot of clubs in Germany, you know, a right kick up the backside to go, right, well, you can get Bayern Munich. You can beat them to the title. I just can't look beyond Thomas Tuchel. I think the fact that he came in at Chelsea middle of the season, which I think is a crucial point. You have to bring in, if you're looking for a permanent manager, you have to bring someone in the middle of the season. And Thomas Tuchel did that with Chelsea, took them to the Champions League final, won the Champions League final against Man City, had a very good record against Guardiola's City, which I think is a really important thing that people forgot with Tuchel's time at Chelsea. And I'm a huge fan of his build-up play. There's all these talks about when he was at Borussia Dortmund, and he, instead of doing the traditional training pitch, he actually created a rhombus in terms of the pitch markings. Just to sort of get people going closer to goal through the middle of the pitch. I think that's exactly the type of innovative tactics that Manchester United need at the moment. Just that little shake-up. And yeah, there is the point about that 3 at the back, isn't there? But Manchester United have quite a lot of centre-halves. You saw Johnny Heavens on Sunday. He came in, did a job.
Throwback.
Yeah, it was actually. He can come in and do a job. So yeah, I think it would make sense. And of course, you've got that Bayern Munich link as well between Tuchel and Ten Hag. You have obviously a few players that were there under Tuchel last season. Matthijs de Ligt, Nusa Mazraoui. So there's that build up from the back that Tuchel can start with. So yeah, if Ten Hag is to be let go in the next few weeks, then I think Tuchel's the perfect choice.
Okay, 1-0 to Mikey. No. Did you guys agree? What a start. Okay, Mikey's off to a flyer. Let's move on to West Ham, because Sam, it hasn't been a great start in East London for Julian Lopetegui.
No, and I'm still looking at Julian Lopetegui's West Ham, and I'm going, what's the plan? Is this a counter-attacking team? Is this a possession-based team? Because with David Moyes, you had a very clear setup, hard to beat at home, can go direct at times, not afraid to do the defensive dirty work, covered a lot of ground. I'm still looking at Lopetegui, and yes, it is early days, so you have to give him a little bit of time to implement that plan. But yeah, I'm still trying to work out what it is. So if we're looking for a potential new West Ham manager, we need a clear philosophy right from the very off. I think the first important thing that a manager has to do is cut out defensive mistakes and be really defensively solid. because we've seen too many individual errors. Obviously, that Chelsea game at home, those 2 early goals for Chelsea, that really put the game beyond West Ham. We've seen a few mistakes from the likes of Max Kilman, who I like as a player, but also Dinos Mavropanos at centre-back. So it's all about improving the current crop of players there at West Ham. I think the crucial thing as well is to be able to get on with a sporting director, because Tim Steidten, he seems like a little bit of a character. There are all these reports about how he operated during David Moyes' time there, and how Moyes actually banned him from the first team dressing room for having too much of a say. So there has to be able to sort of work with somebody to build West Ham and take them back to where they were a few years ago under David Moyes, when they were, of course, European champions.
Yeah, of sorts, European champions, as I love to remind West Ham fans on Twitter. I think that is a fair enough pitch. I think Lopetegui's definitely under pressure. You know, if it wasn't for that win, against Ipswich at the weekend, he could have potentially been the manager that would have lost his job first in the Premier League. The stats are quite damning. 15th for possession. They are conceding a lot of shots on target as well. 15th for XG against per game. That's not what Lopetegui was supposed to be brought in for. He's more of a continuation from Moyes. It felt like a slightly strange appointment given how his last few jobs had fared. Why don't I kick off, given I'm 1-0 down? I think also quite a crucial factor is making this new squad work, because they spent £120 million this summer. That was the 8th biggest spend in Europe, you know, between Juventus and Spurs. So he can't complain that he hasn't been backed, Lopetegui. But if he was removed from his job, I think Thomas Frank would be a really, really smart appointment. Thomas Frank, I'd love for him to get a traditional Big Six job. As I mentioned with Man United, I think he would do a very, very effective job there as well. It maybe feels like he might have missed the boat, given that Ange Postecoglou's now at Spurs. Are Man United going to take a leap to go with Thomas Frank? Again, that would feel very bold, given his record is at Brentford, really. It's, you know, it's not any harder than that. But I'd love to see him get a chance at a club like West Ham, because I do think he really deserves it. You know, his work at Brentford over the years, you know, getting them up to the Premier League, which was a real achievement for a club of that size, and the players they've lost over the years as well. Mope, Konza, Watkins, Benrahma, De Silva, you know, now being injured. Igor Thiago now being injured. Tony, of course, leaving in the summer. This is now injured. And yet they are still competitive, I think, in pretty much every single game. You know, in the Premier League, they've finished 13th, then 9th, then 16th last year. So many different factors involved last year. Among with those, the injuries as well. Both fullbacks being injured, Tony's ban. And yet they still do seem to have a really effective plan in every single game. And we've got a video coming out on Sky Sports Premier League in the next couple of weeks with Thomas Frank breaking down his tactics, which is well worth keeping an eye on. And yeah, it was absolutely enlightening talking to him about his strategy. And it is quite unique, to be honest. They take the shots closest to goal in the Premier League. He's very into his analytics and realises that you can't be shooting from distance if you want to score regularly, or that lessens the chances of it. Crosses into the box, absolutely massive. You know, completed more than double the amount of Chelsea, Man United and Sheffield United in terms of crosses into the box. And they get 51% of their shots on target. So they shoot from very good distances, which increases the chances of getting more shots on target and scoring more goals. And so far, you know, given the players that they've lost over the years, you know, Christian Eriksen as well, that was a huge departure given the creativity he brought and the injury issues he's had over the last 2 years. I think if a club like West Ham came to the table for Thomas Frank, I think he'd really, really consider it.
Do you think he would, though? Because there was talk about Chelsea being interested in him in the summer, and that didn't budge him at all. It feels like it would have to be, you know, a real dream job, like for Thomas Frank to leave Brentford. And I just don't know if West Ham is a dream job for many managers, but I just don't see it as big enough of a step up for him.
I know what you mean, but I can't really remember clearly in the summer. It didn't feel like there was ever an official offer on the table from Chelsea, at least. And I do think they tried to go for a more possession-based manager in Enzo Maresca, and you know, had really impressed for the majority of last season at Leicester. I don't know whether there was an offer on the table, and is he going to get the Arsenal job, the City job, the Chelsea job now, the Liverpool job? No. Is he going to get the United job? That feels like the most likely, to be honest. But if he doesn't get that one, and then West Ham feels like a sort of club where you can really make an impact in the next few years. They've clearly got a big budget, brand new stadium. They are looking for a manager that is charismatic as well and has an effective, clearly defined style of play. And I think he would be interested in the West Ham job. And I think it feels like the sort of perfect next stage for his career. And if you do well at West Ham, get them back into Europe, you increase your chances of getting a top job around Europe. I feel like At the moment, I think it's the right stage, like next step for him. So I can see it happening.
Yeah, it's a big risk though with West Ham though, because if it doesn't work, then he's, Thomas Frank's got one of the safest jobs in football at the moment at Brentford. You feel that they could get relegated, and the work that he's done there, he probably wouldn't get sacked in that sort of circumstance. So yeah, I'd struggle to see this one. But
really, I just don't think there's any chance that even if they did go down, that Thomas Frank would stay at the club. I think he's done the Championship with Brentford. He's established it. He's like, what more could he do with the club has gone through those injuries, that has lost those players? Like, he's ready for a move.
I do think stylistically and as a character, I think Thomas Frank, he is a really, really good fit at West Ham. I don't know whether the manager I'm going to pitch is quite. It's a maverick.
Are you conceding defeat already? Wow.
No, I'm not conceding. I'm not conceding defeat. But this manager, first of all, will be easier to get, I would say. And also, I think, in terms of what West Ham fans want, and it's not all about what the fans want, but I think, that has been a running theme, especially since West Ham moved to the London Stadium, is that, fans have wanted to see a team that play like they are a Champions League club, that play like they are an attacking club capable of challenging for, top 6 places. And of course, David Moyes got them into those realms, but the style of play never quite matched that. And given how much money that they've spent on really top quality attacking players, the likes of Kudus, who could step into almost any Champions League squad, it feels like that there needs to be an injection of inspiration at the London Stadium. And I think it could be time for Maurizio Sarri to return to the Premier League.
Sarri ball.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is a big U-turn
it is a mad one. I can't lie, but I just feel like West Ham, maybe there needs to be something like that. I think David Moyes did get them. I know there have been lots of defensive mistakes, and they actually gave up, I think, the third most XG last season from their defence. So there is work that needs to be done there, but they do have the personnel. And with a manager like Sarri, we could see a side that, a bit similarly to Tuchel, could become a kind of possession powerhouse and stop oppositions that way, rather than being a side that sits back. Because I think, we need to see West Ham on the ball more. They cede far too much space, and I think you're just wasting your attackers there when you do so. Of course, not getting John Duran in the summer and having to settle for Füllkrug, I think is already seen as a bit of a mistake, isn't it, at West Ham, I think. But generally speaking, they've just got so much at their disposal, haven't they? Soler, Qatar, Kudus, Bowen, Antonio, Somerville, like they've got such a stacked forward line, and I think a manager like Sarri can bring the best out of them. And his managerial record, he doesn't really have a bad mark against him, to be honest. I think he did a pretty good job at Lazio, poor in their final season, but the season before, he took over from Simone Inzaghi in 2021, probably the best manager in Lazio's modern history since Sven-Göran Eriksson, you could argue. So a hard man to follow, and improved them on a 6th place finish from the previous season. I think they had the second best attack in Serie A in his first campaign. The following season, they had the second best defence and finished second to Napoli, of course, finished above Champions League finalists Inter. They did overperform their XG a bit in both of those seasons, but in general, Sarri took over a side which hasn't had much investment over the years, actually. Let's remember, I think they ranked 14th, or throughout his time at Lazio, they ranked 14th in Italy for money spent, below the likes of Monza, below the likes of Udinese, Genoa, even, clubs that were, facing relegation a lot of the time. And he managed to get them playing in a pretty functional way. Lost to Cherby as well before his final season, huge figure at the club. Lost Milinkovic-Savic as well. And actually at Lazio, it wasn't super high possession. I think he took what he had and just made do with it, really. I think they were only averaging around 53% possession, which is far down from when he was at Chelsea and Napoli, where they were 65% plus, really completely dominating games, playing incredibly fast football. And I think that's another thing. Sarri is, he likes his football to be played fast, and I think West Ham have players who really suit that. The likes of Jared Bowen, we see that in a counter-attacking context, but if we could see that in a really fast build-up play context, I think that would be really, really exciting. And someone like Guido Rodriguez, who they of course got from Real Betis for free this summer, is a kind of player who I think would suit that as well. He's a great kind of deep-lying defensive midfielder / playmaker, a maverick for sure. Behind the scenes stuff, no guarantees, but it would be really fun. It would be really fun, and I want West Ham to be a really fun team.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I'll just throw a couple more names in
Nice.
the hat,
Okay.
actually, because I wonder if this is the one for Graham Potter. Because this could be the perfect route back in to football. You look at West Ham, they've sort of signed the same players that he would have had at Brighton. You're talking the likes of Kudus. You look at the profile of players as well. You look at Danny Welbeck. Well, he's a very similar job to what Mikel Antonio's doing. And then Jared Bowen, with Kudus being those wingers. Well, that's similar to what Potter had with Mitoma and those wide players there as well. And another name I thought, what about Edin Terzic? That could be an interesting one. Obviously, reached Champions League final with Borussia Dortmund last season, and you've got Nicholas Füllkrug at the club. Perhaps there's a link there where the manager can really boost the summer signing who hasn't really got going yet in East London. But if you're giving me the choice between your two pretty good pitches, two very sort of different managers. Obviously, Sarri had that different route into professional football, and Thomas Frank did as well. He didn't play professionally at all. He was pretty much a Sunday League player that sort of learnt the route. So it's quite interesting pitches. I am going to go, if West Ham can get Thomas Frank, that would
great choice,
be, well, of course you're biased obviously, but if West Ham can get Thomas Frank, that would be a major coup. What Thomas Frank has said in the past is that if it's a really big club, I would go. I'm not sure, even though West Ham fans say they're massive, I'm not sure they're that big to lure Thomas Frank away. But if they can get him, that would be an amazing achievement, because he plays that sort of, doesn't play the best style of football. Brentford don't really have the ball in play quite a lot, but it's really, really effective. And it's very similar to what they had under David Moyes in the previous years, but in a much more modern way. And he can deal with potentially losing a few players if Bowen's to go, if Paqueta is going to have any punishment for his betting ban. Well, Thomas Frank knows all about that with the Ivan Toney situation, how to deal with a player in those scenarios. So yeah, I'm going with Thomas Frank.
I think it's a good call as well. Sarri mid-season as well feels like such a huge departure tactically. I think he'd need a pre-season personally. Right, let's move over to Everton. This is an interesting one because the proposed takeover, the Friedkin Group, is on the cards. I think it's more than on the cards. It looks likely to happen now. They are worth £4.8 billion. Farhad Moshiri is walking away, having made a loss of, I think, £750 million. But he will be the guy that is remembered as the guy that pretty much got the stadium done at Bramley Moor Dock. So that is very exciting for Everton to look forward to. I think they're planning on playing in it in the first match of next season. So things are looking up, but who will be in charge? Because, Sam, Sean Dyche is under pressure.
Well, it would be really ruthless from the Friedkin Group to let Sean Dyche go, but they're known for that because they've literally sacked, in their last two managerial decisions at Roma, they sacked the two most popular Roma managers has ever been in Jose Mourinho, who got them their first ever European trophy. And, who knows what would have happened if the special one had stayed a little bit longer, but you would have certainly backed him to deliver more trophies and to be that personality that Roma fans really want. And then to sack Daniele De Rossi, who is a club legend, who only really had a few months at the job, that's a really ruthless sign. So I wouldn't be surprised if there is a managerial change at Everton this summer. But
I think it could be before this summer.
Or this summer, potentially before that, especially if the results aren't there. But if a new manager is to come in, they'd need to sort of carry on a little bit of the Sean Dyche work because of the players that are there. They have to play that direct style of football, you feel, because in Dominic Calvert-Lewin, he has the best aerial duel success rate in the Premier League this season. And Jordan Pickford is that goalkeeper who can pick him out. So I think you need to sort of start with that style of play. But I think the key thing with Everton is you need to find a manager to change the perception of Everton Football Club, to change the mood. Because it's just gone too much in the other direction. Under the David Moyes and the Roberto Martinez days, Goodison Park was a tough place to go. If you got 3 points there, that was probably one of your results of the season. Now people aren't really scared of it anymore. People are turning up and now expecting to get 3 points against an Everton side, and especially with the new stadium on the way, and even the best clubs have really struggled to recapture the atmosphere of the old ground into the new ground. You need to have an intimidating style of play if you're going to lose that maybe intimidating passion at Goodison Park in the new stadium. So there's your pitch.
Big ask to fill. Mikey, who was your Everton suggestion?
Yeah. So I was going between two managers. I had kind of two options on the table. And it's interesting hearing what you're looking for in a manager, because there was a part of me that thinks, new owners coming in, Friedkin Group, maybe they want to really switch it up and play more attacking football, play more possession style football. I thought initially in terms of that, maybe someone from the continent as well, someone, a bit fresher, bringing in new ideas. I thought Adi Hutter, current Monaco manager, would be a really good option for that. On the flip side, if you wanted to play it safe and you wanted, more of a fortress manager, the return of David Moyes makes sense to me. That makes a lot of sense to me as well. So I'm going to go for Hutter, though. I am going to go for Hutter. I just think in terms of... I think he's probably one of the more underrated managers out there right now. I think it's a bit of a statement, I think, if Everton were to get him, especially at this moment in time where he's actually, really very much in a title race with PSG in France. Monaco, top of the table at the moment. They're yet to lose a game. I think PSG are the only team to have generated more expected goals than them in France. Really impressive last season as well when they finished second, and had a mixed record in Germany. Adi Hutter, of course, was at Mönchengladbach for a season. That was one to forget. Was at Eintracht Frankfurt for 3 seasons, was it? 2 or 3 seasons? Yeah. And, I think it actually set them up quite well for, was it Glasner who took over from him? But again, mixed at Frankfurt, but still some really, really impressive stuff. Before that, though, at Young Boys in Switzerland, I think he won them their first league title in a generation, playing really exciting attacking football, has carried that on at Monaco, has had to deal with a club that has lost key players in the likes of Chouameni, Badia Shield, Disasi, of course lost Yusuf Fofana this summer as well, and has really got them back on track, because Monaco were a very kind of up and down team for a number of years after that kind of Leonardo Jardim golden age with Mbappe and Bakayoko and Bernardo Silva. He's really established them as once again the kind of the second best club in France, and that's with Marseille's resurgence under Roberto De Zerbi this year as well. They still look like the main challenger to PSG. So I feel like someone like Hutter, I think, could come in, and I think Everton's squad as well, I think, is underrated. I think there's a lot to unlock there potential wise in the midfield. We saw the performances of someone like Timo Rugbanum at the start of this year. Given that Onana was such a huge loss in the summer, I think there's still a lot of potential there in midfield. Like Dugu was saying, Calvert-Lewin, I think, is threatening a bit. Like you were saying, Sam, right. Calvert-Lewin's threatening a bit of a resurgence as well up top. We've seen Njai perform really well. Dwight McNeil has found a new lease of life as well and is still only 24, which I find amazing. I feel like he's been around forever. I think maybe Hutter's the more risky appointment. I think David Moyes would be quite safe, but I think if the Friedkin Group want to make a statement and they want to, bring someone in who can excite Everton fans as they enter a new stadium and they try to, regain, the kind of ambitions that they had 10 years ago, then I think someone like Hutter would be a great appointment.
I wouldn't want to be Mrs. Hutter. Just swapping Monaco for Merseyside. I mean, the Bramley Docks are lovely, but it would be a real switch up, wouldn't it?
Fair enough. Yeah, no, it's a good point. It would be quite a drastic change in lifestyle for sure. What I would say about Hutter is Monaco are top of Ligue 1 at the moment, as it stands. I don't want to Marco Rosa him, but that was used as a reason against Marco Rosa.
Yeah, but at the same time, I just think Everton's such a historic. I think it's just it's a more interesting job. I think it's quite easy for managers to get bored at Monaco. The Principality Stadium, like classically, it doesn't have the best atmosphere. There's
nothing
not,
more annoying than watching the highlights of Monaco, and there's about 10 people there.
Yeah, there's not a huge fan culture there, and then it's like you get to go to Everton, manage at a new stadium with one of the most passionate fan bases in Europe, let alone just in England. I think it's a massively exciting opportunity. Like Ancelotti was tempted to Everton. Like I think it's a great job to go for at this moment in time.
It's a great project.
Ancelotti at Everton feels like a fever dream. It's absolutely mad. I'm kind of doing what McCubbin did with Sarri now in my shout. I'm going for Roger Schmidt. We're kind of alternating with our shouts. Now, Roger Schmidt is a really interesting guy, first of all, and a super charismatic, kind leader is what the feedback that I've found in my research really as a sort of character. He's really calm and is used that in a variety of really different situations in terms of his management career. So like Marco Rosa, started at RB Salzburg, that then went to Leverkusen, finished in the Champions League twice with them, brought players like Leon Bailey, Jonathan Tah, Kevin Campbell to Leverkusen, and did a really good job there at Leverkusen. Dropped off in his third year, but had lost players like Son Heung-min, Emre Can during his time there as well. So was kind of fighting a bit of a losing battle in terms of the players going out and the players going in. Then spent 2 years with Beijing Guoan, which I think actually really damaged his reputation around Europe at that time, because this was someone that people were really excited about at Leverkusen. Spends 2 years in China, kind of falls off the map a little bit, goes to PSV, finishes second in both of his 2 seasons there. Very solid at the time. Ajax under Ten Hag were doing great things. We all know how that turned out. But since July 2022, or in July 2022, because it has now changed, he becomes the Benfica boss. And in his first year there, they have an unbelievable campaign. They won 28 of 34 games. They only lost 1 game before April. Did drop off slightly towards the end of the season, but won the league at a counter in a January that saw them lose Enzo Fernandez as well to Chelsea. They just lost Darwin Nunez the summer before he took over. And he helped develop Enzo Fernandez and Gonzalo Ramos into players that were wanted by the rest of Europe's biggest clubs. Antonio Silva took huge strides under him. Yeah, his second year was a little bit more of a disappointment as Ruben Amorim's Sporting CP then went to the title, fired by Victor Gyökeres, amazing campaign there. But then at the start of this year, they took 7 points from 4 games. Not a disaster, not amazing either, but 2 wins and a draw, 1 defeat on their opening day of the season, and Benfica decided to get rid of him and bring back Bruno Lage, who'd won that title when João Felix was at the club, and players like that, and Ruben Dias, etc. So Roger Schmidt, out of nowhere, is kind of unemployed and ready to go. And I think he's come off probably the most impressive stint of his career at Benfica. Some of the football they played was amazing, and he didn't necessarily have the superstar players that Benfica sides in the past have had. He got a lot out of players like Rafa Silva. Angel Di Maria had a really good stint under him as well. So he plays a much more attacking brand of football than Sean Dyche, and has consistently signed really effectively, developed players, and is quite a big departure from Dyche ball, as it were. But I think that may be something that the Friedkin Group would be really interested in. They do have billionaire backing. The Dan Friedkin, the sort of front man, is really known as being quite an extrovert character. He's involved in the film industry and photography, and has just got interests all across a range of society, as it were. And I see them making quite a bold decision when they come in. And Sean Dyche, I think, would be quite unfortunate to lose his job, because he did a really good job there last season in particular when they had that points deduction, the way he managed morale there. But it does feel like for the first time in his Everton career, he's not asking for the sack by any means, but he's definitely sort of having a little bit more of a pop at his players than he had in previous years, I think. He seems a little bit more unsettled. So would he be furious to be fired right now? I'm not totally sure. So someone like Roger Schmidt coming in there could be a breath of fresh air and has a reputation for successful attacking football.
I don't think Sean Dyche would be too disheartened, really, because I think if it went for the points deduction, Everton would have finished 10th last season.
For sure.
So he's actually, done a really, really good job there. But at the same time, you're right there, Dougie. There is that little bit of slight animosity and slight uncertainty there at Everton, which makes his position under a bit of threat. Now, you guys have actually changed my mind, because I was, steadfast on a name you mentioned there, Mike, was David Moyes.
Okay.
I thought, not afraid to go back on his own principles, can be flexible, can play attractive, can also do the counter-attacking, style of play that Everton may need every now and again. And I also think that if David Moyes was returned to Everton, everyone would go, wow, David Moyes is back at Everton. This could be a serious team again. I do wonder, though, whether that more ambitious European manager that you two have done is actually probably more worth it.
We've won you over.
Yeah, I think so.
See you later, Moisey.
In terms of who's better out of your two options, well, that's really, really difficult. I think Adi Hutter is probably, you're less likely to get him because he's currently doing such a good job at the moment. So I am going to lean towards Roger Schmidt just because he's easier to get.
I should have gone for Moyes.
But also, yeah, exactly. But I also think the fact that the names you mentioned there, Darwin Núñez, Gonzalo Ramos, if you could do that to Dominic Calvert-Lewin, then sell him off for 80 million plus, which, that's the sort of level that Ollie Watkins and John Duran is going for at the moment, then that's massive for Everton's finances. Not that they may need it because the Friedkin Group are coming in, but you then have a completely different Everton Football Club, which can then operate with a much bigger budget and then can sort of return towards those Moyes and Martinez days.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are some exciting players at Everton as well. Jack Harrison, Iliman Ndiaye has been amazing so far this season. Dwight McNeil as well. What a season he's had so far.
He's the most creative player in the Premier League,
yeah,
isn't he?
He's been
Dwight
brilliant.
McNeil, yeah.
He's been brilliant. So, okay, it's 2-1 to me. Exciting stuff. Right, we're getting right down to the bottom of the league now. We're going to talk about Wolves in just a bit, but first let's talk about Southampton. Because Russell Martin is being very stubborn, Sam, but it's not been totally successful so far.
It's not. Southampton are a really weird one because I think they rank 4th in the Premier League for possession.
Yeah.
But they're near the bottom in terms of points, and they're just not turning that possession into progression and then into goals and then into success and then points and then moving up the Premier League table. I do like the players there, though. I think there's a good setup. I think for a new manager, if Russell Martin is to go, the ability to bring in young players and to really be in touch with that academy is a must, because Tyler Dibbling looks like the latest player in a long string of Southampton Academy players. He really looks like
amazing.
The real deal. He's just got that. He's got that little bit of Martin Ødegaard about him, but with a bit more sort of height and one-on-one ability to him. So yeah, I think that's an important thing, being in touch with the academy. I think being ruthless with the forward line as well. There are so many strikers there at Southampton, Cameron Archer, Ben Brereton, Diaz, that can produce a lot of goals, but for some reason aren't. So they have to have some sort of history with strikers and improving attacking players. So I wonder where you guys are going to go with this one.
Nice one. Mikey, why don't you start?
Yeah, I've gone for an interesting one. So our last two clubs, of course, here are Southampton and Wolves. And this is the ability to easily get hold of this manager is kind of dependent on what Wolves do. But I do feel like Gary O'Neill is under an awful lot of pressure at Wolves now. But he's also proven himself to be an excellent firefighter over the last 2 years with his jobs at Wolves and Bournemouth. And I do feel like the Southampton job could be something for him. And
like a relegation switch.
A little relegation switch, yeah. I mean, if Wolves were to get rid of him, I think Southampton would be silly not to sound him out. You look at the job that he did, first of all, at Bournemouth, which was, in what was it, 2022, Scott Parker, was it after 4 games, sacked, him brought in, well, him
conceded a lot of goals as well.
Yeah, they conceded a ton, and Bournemouth had, by far the worst squad in the league at that stage. It was before the American takeover. It was before that investment in the likes of Ouattara and Semenyo. O'Neill came in and made them look a lot more functional, and took a team that really should have got relegated based on the level in that squad. And where did they finish? Was it 15th or 14th in the end in 2023? Set them up really, really well for then Araola to take over them and turn them into a more established side in the Premier League. Slightly harsh to have got the sack there, but I think it was ultimately the right decision. And then to have come in to Wolves on the eve of last season when Lopetegui left under a cloud, not happy with the lack of backing in the transfer market, and to take a side that had lost key players, in the likes of Nunes with João Neves as well, leaving the club, and to get them playing, really good attacking football last year, defensively very solid. A number of standout performances, particularly in that Man City game, I think was really, really impressive. And yes, there's been a lot of transition again at the club this summer, a lot of turnover in terms of the squad, key players being sold in Kilman and Pedro Neto, and they've had they've not looked good at the start of this season, especially defensively, and they've shifted to a back four when the back three was working so well last year. It's not been great, but I think Gary O'Neill as a short-term manager at a club of the size of Southampton and their predicament, I think could be really good. And you mentioned strikers. Look at what he did, with Dominic Solanke at Bournemouth. People give a lot of credit to Araola for Solanke, but Solanke looks like a really, really top Premier League attacker under O'Neill. Even if the goals weren't there, he looked like such a class act under him. And I think O'Neill could bring that out in someone like Diaz, who, we're yet to see perform fully in the Premier League. He was actually pretty good at Sheffield United last year, despite them being really bad. But I think there's a lot to unlock there. And again, with Archer, another one who has looked amazing in the Championship. But Sheffield United last year did not look so at home in the Premier League. So I think O'Neill has a lot of credit in the bank in that aspect.
I'm not going to lie, you're going to have to do really, really well to beat that one.
It is a difficult one.
Yeah.
It is a difficult one. I mean, what I would say is it relies on Wolves and Southampton changing managers potentially at the same time, which could be quite difficult.
I think there's like another couple of losses on the bounce at Wolves, and I think O'Neill's position will become really, really difficult to.
I think they've got City and then Brighton, and they've got a really amazing run of fixtures until Christmas time, Wolves, but we'll get onto them in due course. I was going to suggest Graham Potter for Southampton, but then I just kind of thought about it, and I just don't think he goes to Southampton. From Chelsea to a club that feel pretty nailed on feels very harsh, but a strong favourite to be relegated just feels like a massive risk. He's been linked with Ajax and Napoli in the last year. We're not sure how far those talks went, but to then go to Southampton feels like a big risk. So instead,
he's also been linked to Stoke as well. So that's
also been linked to Stoke,
that's the other side of the coin.
I mean, it's clear that going on Monday Night Football, showing a lot of tactical acumen on there. It's the thing that you do when you want to get back in the window. So fair play. He's obviously looking for a job, but I just don't think he takes the Southampton one. The player, or the manager I'm going to suggest rather than the player, is Igor Tudor. Now, he is linked to Maurizio Sarri because he took over at Lazio when Sarri went, I think it was 8 games without a win in March, and he really settled them down. I think they only lost one of their final 7 league games. No, one of their final 9 league games, I think it was. Only Atalanta took more points than them in that time. And he's an interesting sort of background story. So he was Andrea Pirlo's assistant at Juventus, much more known as the kind of brains behind that operation, because Pirlo was a complete novice at that stage when he took over that Juventus job. He then goes to Marseille, does a very decent job at Marseille, leads them to 3rd. It was their best points tally in 5 seasons. And, he'd had a stint at Hellas Verona beforehand as well. And you wanted your strikers to really up their game as well. Giovanni Simeone, Diego Simeone's son, scored 17 league goals that year. Then goes to Marseille, improves them dramatically on what they'd done in the previous 5 years. Alexis Sanchez scores 18 in all competitions in his mid-30s. Very, very impressive stuff there. Leaves Marseille as any manager with a bit of sense has in the last few years, because it's incredibly chaotic as a club. Then goes to Lazio, another strange career decision in many ways, but does really effectively there. Leaves in the summer because there's so much squad turnover there. Had fallen out with Claudio Latito, the owner, but was very, very impressive during his time there. Only conceded 6 goals in their final 9 games there. Finished 7th, an improvement on what Maurizio Sarri had left him with, and plays a sort of 3-4-2-1 formation, which is quite flexible in possession, really intense presses. And you feel like maybe Southampton, in terms of individual player quality and in terms of creativity in particular, maybe don't have the creativity to unlock defensive. But if they unlock it through sheer work rate and putting teams under an immense pressure, that could be a real weapon for them. At Marseille, in terms of passes per defensive action, they were top in Liga in his season there. In his final full season at Verona, they were 3rd for intense pressures as well. So he's clearly able to instill a message and get his team on side with that message in terms of working hard and creating chances further up the pitch. So solid defensively, not so wedded to a possession style of play as Russell Martin, but with an interesting way of creating attacking opportunities. So I think Igor Tudor would be a left field shout, but maybe he'd do it.
I think another left field shout maybe Kasper Hjulmand, the former Denmark manager. Obviously, there is Denmark, heritage in the ownership at Southampton through Rasmus Ankersen, formerly at Brentford, and obviously Hjulmand took FC Nordsjælland to the Champions League, into the group stages. He also won 60% of his games for Denmark as well. So that's quite an interesting one to look out for if Russell Martin is to go. But I'm completely sold on this Gary O'Neill idea.
Okay.
I'm completely sold because I think
I was struggling as soon as he said that.
Yeah, of course. I think you have to remember when O'Neill took over at Wolves had the worst attack in the Premier League, I think, under Lopetegui. They really, really struggled for goals. And when Wolves won under Lopetegui during that small stint there, it was like, wow, Wolves have got results. I think, but then he turned, and then Gary O'Neill turned that Wolves attack. Matheus Cunha had the best season of his Premier League career. Pedro Neto had the best season of his Premier League career. Hee Chang-wan did as well. So that's exactly what Southampton need. They need to get their strikers going. They need to get that just little extra something in the final third that they're currently missing. And I think Gary O'Neill could well be the manager to do that because he's good with the ball, but he's also good without the ball. So it's Desmond.
Sweet. Sam, you've set up a blockbuster final club pick. So it is 2-2 as it stands, guys, as we talk about Wolves. Now, Gary O'Neill's going to Southampton, apparently.
He's off. There's a vacant position.
There's a huge vacant position.
It's a great scenario we've got.
But Sam, I mean, just briefly, Wolves, Mikey pointed it out. They've had some difficult fixtures, but the results just haven't been there.
No, and of course, it's been a difficult summer as well. Losing Max Kilman, Pedro Neto, haven't been able to replace them. So they need a forward-thinking manager, someone who's in touch with the academy, can maybe use a couple of youngsters as sort of backup in case these big players leave, because they could. Because I'm a huge fan of João Gomez. I think he's a player who could have a move. Carlos Forbes, how many ex-Man City academy players have gone to a Premier League club, then gone to another bigger Premier League club? How long until players come in for them, for Matheus Cunha, for Rayan Aït-Nouri? So a get it done no matter what manager is sort of what we're looking for here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Strand Larsen started really impressively as well, but I think it's because even their run towards the back end of last season was really, really disappointing. They've actually only got 6 points from their last 17 games, which you average that across an entire season. That's 13 points. That's Derby County level bad. So Wolves, again, you wouldn't be really surprised if they did make a change. Why don't I kick off? Because I don't think I've started one of the last few ones. I've gone quite big. I've gone for Sergio Conceicao, formerly of FC Porto. Now, there are obviously Portugal ties there, but he left FC Porto in the summer after winning the Portuguese Cup. He spent 7 seasons with FC Porto, 11 trophies there. Last season was a little bit of a disappointment. They were knocked out of the last 16 of the Champions League by Arsenal on penalties. No shame there. Did really well to wind up Arteta on the sideline there. So I'd really like to see that.
I think it was the other way round as well.
Maybe, yeah. I'd like to see that rekindled on the Premier League touchlines as well. But finished 18 points behind Sporting CP. But across his entire time in Portugal was really pretty impressive. 3 league titles, 4 Portuguese Cups, and very, very solid defensively. Never conceded more than 29 in a league season. Of course, you have the advantage with FC Porto, one of the biggest, if not the biggest club in Portugal. The record they have there, they're going to be able to hoover up the best domestic talent. They are going to lose some stars abroad, though. And I think the way that he managed to keep that team competitive despite losing, the list is endless, really. I'll go through it now. Dallo, Ricardo Pereira, Willy Bolly, Eder Militao, Felipe, Fabio Silva, Alex Telles, Luis Diaz, Vitinha, Fabio Vieira, Otavio, Evan Nilsson this summer, Taremi this summer as well. They do have a history of just selling their best players every single summer. So in order to keep your side competitive, in order to keep it fresh, I think that's really pretty impressive. Would he go to Wolves? Probably not. I think it is really bold, to be honest. I think he's probably looking for a Europa League or Champions League level club. But at the same time, I think there's obvious ties there in terms of the Portuguese blood, and we've already listed a number of interesting players that you would have to work for. Get yourself in the shop window at Wolves, secure them safety next year, maybe push into hopefully mid-table, upper mid-table next year, and then you're back at the sharp end of European football. So maybe Conceicao would be up for it.
That's an interesting one.
Yeah, that is punchy. I mean, my target is also quite punchy as well. and it's a name that has been mentioned by both of you throughout this episode at points, and it is Graham Potter.
Okay.
I'm bringing out the Graham Potter card right at the end. I think Wolves, I agree with you, Dukes, in terms of you not going for him at Southampton. I think Southampton is too much of a step down. I know Wolves are down at the bottom of the table at the moment, but they are just a more established Premier League
More
club.
quality in it.
Yeah.
More quality as well, especially in terms of kind of, overseas talent who've been imported into the Premier League and look really, really strong. João Gomez in particular just looks like a star, doesn't he? And I think Graham Potter, he has the credentials that suggests that he could come into this Wolves setup and not have to change too much, and I think he'd get quite a lot out of it. I think Ait Nouri is an absolute star in the making. I'm actually surprised that an elite club were not heavily linked with him in the summer. He feels cut out for it. I know, a wing, because he's a wing back, it's a little bit harder to kind of place him in a lot of top level clubs just positionally. But someone like him, I think, could continue to be used as one of Wolves' main weapons under Graham Potter. And someone like Rodrigo Gomez, who was brought in from Portugal in the summer, had an amazing record. Was it at Braga last year? Looks kind of like the Pedro Neto replacement, but hasn't really been utilised by Gary O'Neill yet, which I find really puzzling. I think Graham Potter is the kind of manager who would come in and just, he would be instantly in the side and would be producing. I think his record with young players at Brighton speaks for itself, doesn't it? The fact that he was able to manage that Brighton side with them losing, key players summer on summer, and ultimately being able to, develop players to the point where they were being sold for, upwards of 100 million. In the case of Moises Caicedo, I think Graham Potter, I know Caicedo's development, continued under De Zerbi before that happened, but Potter really put the wheels in motion in that sense. You look at Yves Bissouma as well, what he achieved with him. I think Graham Potter would be really suited. I think he would, get that Wolves side into a back three. I think he would, utilise the wing backs once again, and I think he'd get someone like Rodrigo Gomez firing. It's
a really, really tough one, this one, because I think both of these managers are actual coups, aren't they, for Wolves? That you'd sort of look at them and go, "Wow, that's a good managerial appointment." I am going to lean towards Conceicao though.
Oh wow! Okay,
yeah, I think that's that one really, really interests me.
Love it.
I think you also get Francisco Conceicao in the deal as well. You get the son as well, so you probably get the Pedro Neto replacement right there and there. So yeah, I think he's. I see your point of whether would he go to Wolves, maybe not. But there's not many Premier League jobs come available year on year, so I do wonder if Conceicao would probably look at it and go, yeah, that's a good project for me. And if it doesn't work, he can go back to Portugal. He's got a great reputation there. But I think that's definitely a risk worth taking for him.
Love it. Yeah, I think he was linked with the Milan job in the summer and got overlooked for it in the end. So I'm not quite sure where his reputation is at. Yeah, outside of Portugal, basically. But there we have it. 3-2 to me. Absolutely delighted.
Well played.
Huge. I think that's my first victory in the Lowdown and the games we've been playing. Mikey, take that. Absolutely love it. Thank you so much for watching the episode, guys. Let us know whether you agreed with our selections for those clubs that are struggling throughout the Premier League. Let us know your own suggestions in the comment section down below. Huge thanks as ever to Mikey McCubbin. An excellent debut from Sam Blitz. Make sure you follow him on social media and check out his articles across Sky Sports. And we'll catch you next week, guys. Bye-bye.